Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Martial Universe Season 6 based on novel. So let's start. The night sky gradually turned darker. However, that wild and violent energy ripple continued to remain in the night sky, causing many gazes present to be quietly tremble in fear. A couple of figures stood facing the wind on a tall tower at the north of the city. Their eyes were locked onto the direction where the big battle had erupted earlier. There was an unknown expression in their eyes. What an interesting fellow. However, his strength is indeed quite strong. There was a moon-white clothed handsome man standing right at the front. He gradually withdrew his gaze from the distant, while an interested smile surfaced on his face. Although I do not have a deep relationship with Lin Dong, I am aware that someone like him will not live under anyone. The Wind Cloud Empire will definitely end up being rejected if it wished to recruit them. Another white-clothed figure stood behind the white-clothed man. This was Mu Hanyu, whom Lin Dong had met during the day. At this moment, she had also withdrew her gaze from the night sky. There was still some remnant shock within her pretty eyes. Clearly, that big battle earlier had greatly exceeded her expectations. Not easy to recruit her. I can tell that Lin Dong's group is not a simple one. If we can recruit them, they will definitely be of great help. The handsome man said. Difficult. Mu Hanyu shook her head slightly. She looked towards the direction that Luo Tong had fled towards and softly said, Luo Tong is a good example. The reason why Lin Dong fought is to send us a message. He does not intend on joining any empires. Or rather, he thinks that there is not a single empire who has the qualification to recruit them, even including us, the super empires. Ha ha, what an arrogant fellow. The man laughed. It might be impossible to recruit such a person as a subordinate, but it is still possible to have a good relation with him through other means. Currently, they have offended the Wind Cloud Empire. This is quite good from the perspective of our Lone Moon Empire. Mu Hanyu said. The man nodded as he voiced his thoughts. The focus of the Wind Cloud Empire will definitely be placed on the auction held the day after tomorrow. They intend to obtain that heavenly soul treasure at any cost. If they were to obtain it, it is likely that no one will be able to stop them in the Wanxiang city. Other than our Lone Moon Empire, there are two other super empires who are also eyeing that heavenly soul treasure. They will not allow the Wind Cloud Empire to obtain it so easily, Mu Hanyu spoke faintly. There is still going to be a fight over this matter. Whoever obtains this heavenly soul treasure would likely gain quite a great advantage in the subsequent 100 Empire War. No one will give up so easily. Two figures were seated on a tall platform at the southern part of the city. A chessboard was placed in front of them, and it looked like they were challenging each other. Swoosh! A rushing wind sound was emitted from a distance. Following which, a figure filled with a bloody stench hideously descended on a platform, before he stood in front of two seated individuals. His face was bitter, and it was indeed Luo Tong, who was defeated in Lin Dong's hands earlier. Lin Dong, it is rumored that he has obtained one of the four great mysterious sects' inheritance. It is unexpected that someone who had come from a low-ranked empire is actually able to climb to such a stage in the ancient battlefield. It is really not easy. A seated figure raised his eyes, glanced at Luo Tong and laughed faintly. That fellow is indeed quite strong. Moreover, the martial arts that he had displayed is also extremely strange. Luo Tong could not resist, but say after recalling the mysterious martial arts displayed by Lin Dong that had transformed his finger into a dragon finger. It should be a martial arts from the Green Dragon Hall, one of the four great mysterious sects. Another seated man raised his head. His facial expression was of a sickly pale color. That paleness appeared as though there was no blood flowing in him. That fellow refuses to hand over Suru. What should we do? Luo Tong softly asked. We must definitely obtain that girl. If we are able to obtain that kind of strength, we will definitely be able to stand out in the 100 Empire War. In fact, we will have no need to fear even when facing those powerful existences. The pale-faced man pressed his finger gently on the chessboard and smiled faintly. If he doesn't appreciate kindness, all we will need to do is to finish him off when the time comes. The smile on the corner of the man's mouth clearly had a ferocious feeling to it when he spoke. Luo Tong quietly nodded. His eyes similarly possessed a cold glint surging within it. Of course, we must first obtain that heavenly soul treasure from the auction. Once we obtain that thing, we will no longer need to be afraid of the remaining 3 super empires in the Wanxiang city. A little stray like Lin Dong shall amount to nothing. The figure opposite the pale-faced man finally spoke hoarsely. He raised his head and a ferocious scar could be seen on his face. The scar appeared to wiggle like a centipede, emitting an evil aura as it did so. Luo Tong, you should go and recuperate from your injuries first. Leave them alone for 2 days. We will settle all the grudges when the time comes. The chess piece on the scarred man's hand suddenly landed onto the chessboard. An incomparable wild and violent energy seeped out. All the chess pieces on the chessboard were shattered into powder. I understand. Luo Tong nodded. After which, he turned around and left without saying anything else. How troublesome. If it is not because I do not wish for more trouble at this point in time, I really wish to take action and finish off that brat. The scarred man lifted his head and muttered. He was staring into the distance in a dense wild beast-like manner. Relax, none of them will be able to escape once we obtain the heavenly soul treasure. Compared to this, I really feel a heartache for the price that we will need to pay in order to buy the heavenly soul treasure. If we are not in the Wanxiang city, I really wish to snatch it directly. The pale-faced man laughed faintly. Regardless of what price we pay, we can get them all back when the time comes. The scarred man parted his mouth and smiled. A chillness spread from his dense white teeth. Cuckoo, that's right. The pale-looking man raised his head. The savage feeling from the corner of his mouth became increasingly dense as he muttered, none of you will be able to escape. Such a conversation was currently appearing from quite a number of places within the Wanxiang city. The fight tonight had greatly exceeded the expectations of most people. Originally, they thought that Lin Dong would be suppressed in the face of the powerful 4-yuan Nirvana stage strength of Luo Tong. However, the final result was Luo Tong fleeing after being injured. Lin Dong had displayed a shocking strength. However, many people understood that though he might appear impressive, he had also completely infuriated the Wind Cloud Empire. After all, the 2 leaders from the Wind Cloud Empire that had yet to reveal themselves were the truly frightening existences. Lin Dong's expression was calm as he stared at the direction in which Luo Tong had fled from the night sky. After which, he slowly landed into the courtyard. Su Kuei looked at Lin Dong, who had returned to the courtyard. He quietly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The latter's strength had clearly shocked him once again. He had discovered that after being acquainted with Lin Dong, he was continuously being shocked by the strength and trump cards displayed by the latter. It seems that we have truly formed a deep grudge with that Wind Cloud Empire this time around, little Martin casually laughed. Lin Dong nodded slightly. His gaze was immediately turned towards Su Kuei as he asked, the Wind Cloud Empire has 2 leaders. Yup, these 2 fellows are extremely powerful. They are different from Luo Tong, who has only just advanced to the 4-yuan Nirvana stage. They have long since stepped into this stage. Moreover, they are also people who are in the heavenly category of the Nirvana tablet. Su Kuei's expression became solemn upon mentioning this. He clearly understood that the matter tonight had completely offended the Wind Cloud Empire, and they would likely attack them soon. At that time, it would really be a soul-stirring time. Moreover, the techniques of those two fellows are also extremely vicious. Back then, they destroyed nearly 5 high-ranked empires overnight, when they had just arrived at the Wanxiang city. They even exchanged blows with a super empire like the Lone Moon Empire. Finally, they directly forced the members from the reigning super sect to intervene, before the conflict was finally resolved. Destroying 5 high-ranked empires, Lin Dongzong dilated his eyes. This method of establishing their dominance was indeed vicious. The Wind Cloud Empire is the strongest amongst the 4 super empires in the Wanxiang city. Adding the current Luo Tong, they possess 3 experts, who had stepped into the 4 Yuan Nirvana stage. On the other hand, the remaining 3 super empires only have 1 person, who had advanced to this level. Lin Dong nodded as he let out a sigh in his heart. From the looks of it, these super empires can also be divided into the strong and the weak ones. At the very least, this Wind Cloud Empire was much stronger on the surface when compared with the other 3 super empires. No wonder they were able to act in such a domineering manner in this city. The so-called 100 Empire War is ultimately a place for the super empires to fight. Other than some of those who had truly gained great luck and ability from the other empires, most of those who remained until the end are those who from the super empires. It is really too difficult for an ordinary person to even gain a spot, much less stand out in that kind of place. Lin Dong also deeply agreed with this. Those people from the super empires already belonged to the peak level ever since they had entered this space. Even if they did not spend any effort to search for treasures or inheritances, they will still form over 90% of the competitors. It was easier said than done for an ordinary person to compete with these people from a completely different starting point. However, there was no absolute fairness in this word. Constantly dwelling over it will only make an ordinary individual even more ordinary, and they would only feel some additional useless resentment for no reason. The 4 super empires in Wanxiang City do not possess a congenial relationship. The auction this time around might worsen that grudge. I have heard that the 4 super empires are all targeting that heavenly soul treasure. No matter who the item ends up with, this Wanxiang city will definitely not be calm. Those grudges will also erupt at that time. Lin Dong nodded slowly. He lifted his head and looked into the distant night sky. He vaguely felt that this city seemed to possess the feeling of an approaching storm. After the auction was over the day after, it was likely that this city would also end up turning into a chaotic one. At that time, the Wind Cloud Empire would also likely attack them. As the 100 Empire War approached, the population in Wanxiang City grew increasingly terrifying. An escalating number of practitioners streamed in from every direction, causing the already electrifying atmosphere in the city to suddenly reach a whole new level. Over the past 2 days, several newcomers arrived to take the Nirvana Monument test, however, none of them could touch the first 3 ranks of the Earth category. What's more, it would be impossible for any of them to charge in and claim 3 of the 4 top spots in the Earth category in a domineering fashion like Lin Dong's group had done. Of course, this was partly because there were a few individuals who were unwilling to expose their true strength. After all, there were countless dragons and tigers hidden in Wanxiang City, and the people who could make it here were cautious and smart individuals. Hence, they naturally did not want to expose themselves. Nonetheless, this did nothing to conceal the commotion that Lin Dong's group had caused in the city. During that night, many people had witnessed the fight between Lin Dong and Luo Tong. Henceforth, there was hardly anyone in Wanxiang City who did not know of Lin Dong's daring exploit of challenging a prized fighter from the Wind Cloud Empire. After news of that night's event spread, What caused most people to be stunned was that the intolerant and arrogant Wind Cloud Empire, who once eliminated 5 high-rank empires in Wanxiang City, would turn eerily silent. In fact, it did not seem like they were going to cause trouble for Lin Dong. Of course, from the intel that they received, some astute individuals were able to vaguely deduce the reason. They knew that even though this grudge would not be easily resolved, the Wind Cloud Empire currently did not want to be distracted by Lin Dong's group. After all, their current target was the rumored Heavenly Soul Treasure that would appear in the auction. After the fight over the Heavenly Soul Treasure was concluded, it will be time to resolve that grudge. Like the calm before the storm, 2 days passed by stealthily and quietly. As news of the Heavenly Soul Treasure spread, an increasingly number of elite practitioners streamed into Wanxiang City over the past 2 days. Everyone was aware just how powerful a Heavenly Soul Treasure was. If they could somehow obtain it, their strength would surely surge. In fact, it would even give them a good fighting chance in the upcoming 100 Empire War. Due to the temptation of the Heavenly Soul Treasure, the city grew increasingly chaotic. As thousands waited with bated breaths, 2 days passed. Finally, the Wanxiang City auction arrived in a leisurely manner. The auction was held in a large arena in the northern part of the city. As a heavyweight city, Wanxiang City was not lacking in land. Even though the city was packed, the arena was still able to accommodate them. When Lin Dong's group arrived at the large arena, it was already packed with people. When they heard the sound waves that dashed through the heavens, even though Lin Dong was already prepared for it, he involuntarily marveled secretly in his heart. Lin Dong's group walked into the arena, and instantly felt countless peculiar stares being directed at him from every direction. In a short 2 days, Lin Dong had definitely become a well-known figure in Wanxiang City. Therefore, it was no surprise that everyone was aware of him. Ha ha, it seems like the allure of the Heavenly Soul Treasure is pretty strong. Even Lin Dong has been drawn here. Soon after Lin Dong's group walked into the arena, a laugh sounded out from nearby. Lin Dong turned around, only to see Chang Ling, who he was briefly acquainted with, walk towards him together with a group of men. With regards to Chang Ling, Lin Dong did not dislike him. Just like him, the latter did not have a powerful background, and it must have took him a tremendous amount of effort in order to secure his current accomplishments. Lin Dong was clearly aware of the sacrifices it took. Brother Chang Ling. Lin Dong cupped his hands and smiled. Brother Lin Dong has truly made a name for himself overnight. That fight during that night was truly shocking. Chang Ling sincerely replied. That night, he had initially been worried for Lin Dong when he saw Luo Tong approaching Lin Dong's group. However, he never expected that renowned elite practitioner in Wanxiang City would be eventually forced by Lin Dong to eat humble pie and retreat. Lin Dong's performance that night can only be described by one word: stunning. The people beside Chang Ling were also staring reverently at Lin Dong. In their opinion, a super empire was a monstrous entity. Therefore, they admired the fact that Lin Dong actually had the guts to challenge one. With regards to their stares, Lin Dong could only laugh. No one would want to irky the wrath of such a troublesome foe, and he was no exception. However, things did not always play out as planned. Brother Lin Dong, I know that you must be here because of the Heavenly Soul Treasure. However, based on the information that I have received, the Wind Cloud Empire is the favored winner in this fight. Once the Heavenly Soul Treasure lands on their laps, based on their usual methods, they will surely employ drastic measures against anyone who have crossed them. At that time, you will probably be at the top of their list. Chang Ling glanced around, before he suddenly cautioned in a low voice. Lin Dong was slightly taken aback. Promptly, he gently nodded his head and said, "Thanks. I will be careful." When he saw this situation, Chang Ling, who was originally planning to advise him to leave Wanxiang City, shook his head while he bitterly laughed. After conversing for a while, he led his men and headed towards the front of the arena. Seems like the Wind Cloud Empire came prepared. While he stared at Chang Ling's back, Lin Dong was deep in thought. Even though the Wind Cloud Empire was powerful, could they defeat the three other super empires? It was never wise to count your chickens before they hatch. Go. Let's enter. Lin Dong shook his head and suppressed these thoughts. Following which, he directly led little Martin and found a seat in the large arena. Seems like quite a number of elite practitioners have came to Wanxiang City over the last 2 days. After taking their seats, little Martin's eyes casually scanned his surroundings, before he suddenly said. Lin Dong gently nodded his head. Even though there were countless number of auras crisscrossed in the arena, he could still sense a few powerful vibrations within. In fact, some of these auras were similar to Luo Tong. Evidently, these elite practitioners were all attracted by the heavenly soul treasure. While Lin Dong was surveying his surroundings, a commotion suddenly erupted in the arena. Following which, a splitting wind sound echoed out as dozens of individuals descended from and landed directly at the forefront of the arena. The Lone Moon Empire. Amongst the dozen or so figures, Lin Dong stared at one familiar and alluring figure. She was Mu Hanyu. Besides her was a man dressed in white clothes. The aura that emerged from within that man's body caused Lin Dong's expression to turn solemn. That aura was more than twice as powerful as Luo Tong's. That is the leader of the Lone Moon Empire, Mu Lin. Su Kuei stared at that individual while he solemnly said. Very powerful indeed. Lin Dong gently nodded his head. From Mu Lin's body, he could sense an extremely dangerous sensation. Immediately, he silently sighed inside his heart. He was truly envious of the members of these super empires. When Lin Dong observed Mu Lin, the latter also detected him. Immediately, he turned around and looked right at Lin Dong. Following which, he gently smiled at him. When he saw Mu Lin's friendly gesture, Lin Dong immediately returned it with a smile. He was no fool. Unless he had no other choice, he did not want to cross these powerful super empires. Not long after the Lone Moon Empire members appeared, 2 other groups entered the arena in a dazzling fashion. Under the attention of the crowd, they landed at the forefront of the arena. That man is Wu Ta from one of the 4 great super empires, Forest Empire. He is similarly a powerful individual, who has reached the heaven category on the Nirvana monument. Su Kuei pointed at a green-robed man. The man's hair was jade green as well. However, the skin of his body was extremely dry and it even showed signs of cracking. Therefore, he looked quite peculiar. Nonetheless, the aura from his body did not lose out to Mu Lin. Besides him, is Mo Fen from the Lihua Empire. They used to be a powerful existence that commanded an entire region. On the other side was a muscular man, with fire tattoos emblazoned on his back. He was seated on a stone chair, while a savage and dry yuan power rippled from his body, causing the air several feet around him to turn exceedingly dry. The heads of the other 2 super empires. Lin Dong's eyes glanced at the 2 individuals who had powerful auras. Promptly, he gently nodded his head. They were indeed individuals who were able to obtain the heaven category on Nirvana monument. Sure enough, they would not be easy to deal with. Even though most of the people who could reach this place were pretty powerful, compared to the 3 of them, the difference was immediately apparent. The ones who are going to appear next should be the Wind Cloud Empire. Lin Dong's eyes slowly narrowed. Moments later, his heart violently shook. He could feel 2 extremely powerful yuan power vibrations suddenly surge from a distance away. Like a hurricane, it swept into the arena and blew the crowds away. Ha ha, It seems like most of you guys have arrived early. However, this heaven's soul treasure is something that my wind cloud empire must have. Today, let me witness who has the ability to snatch something away from our wind cloud empire. A savage wind blew, while a hearty laugh wrapped with bipotent yuan power boomed across the large arena, causing many people's eardrums to ache. However, none of them dared to reveal a dissatisfied expression on their faces. Lin Dong slowly lifted his head and turned to look in that direction. At that spot, a savage yuan power hurricane gathered together, before two figures appeared flamboyant in front of the crowd. Right now, those two figures also turned around. Immediately, their eyes, which were several times sharper than Luo Tong, fixed onto Lin Dong's body with a slightly icy glint. The originally chaotic arena turned silent quietly. In fact, even Mu Lin and the rest tilted their heads and stared at this sight. The Wind Cloud Empire is truly domineering. Lin Dong's eyes met with those two pairs of eyes. Promptly, they crisscrossed under the stares of the crowd while he softly said. While he softly spoke, a man with a centipede-like scar on his face instantly chuckled. Promptly, his bone-chilling laughter ricocheted across the entire arena. Are you Lin Dong? Very well, your life is mine. His sinister laughter resounded throughout the auction area. However, what changed most people's facial expression was that they could sense the strong killer intent within that laughter. All their attention was finally shifted towards Lin Dong. However, what surprised everyone was that even when Lin Dong was being threatened by the notorious leader of the Wind Cloud Empire, his face was still as calm as a serene lake. Countless faces were reflected in his eyes. No one knew what this youth was thinking of when he actually dared to provoke the Wind Cloud Empire. Beside Lin Dong, little Martin shot an indifferent glance at the guy with a scar on his face. His purple-black eyes seemed to be surging with chilliness. At this moment, the silly smile on Little Flame's face disappeared as well. A terrifying baleful aura began to emit from him slowly. He raised his head and a tinge of scarlet was rising in his eyes. Then, like a great beast from the desolated land, he warned with a deep and brutal voice, I dare you to try it. The auction house became silent once again, and everyone was looking at the giant-like Little Flame. Suddenly, a fiendish aura extended outwards from his body, frightening a lot of people. Even Mu Lin and his counterparts were startled by this sight. Soon after, an astonished look appeared on their faces. They had never expected that even when faced with a threat from such a vicious individual from Wind Cloud Empire, Lin Dong's faction still dared to oppose them. Such a daring fellow. Because of Little Flame's actions, that man with a centipede-like scar on his face raged and then laughed. A similar fiendish aura surged out from his body continuously. It appeared that he had the intention of attacking on the spot. Anyone knows how to brag. I think it's best to settle all our grudges after the auction has ended. Lin Dong suddenly waved his hands at Little Flame and said, while looking at the scarred guy whose body was surging with a fiendish aura. You're right. After the auction has ended, all those who are enemies of the Wind Cloud Empire will not escape. The figure beside the scarred man turned his head around and revealed an especially pale white face and stared at Lin Dong. After a while, he gave a knowing smile before he sat back down on the stone chair. I will let you live a little bit longer. Cherish the little amount of time you have left. The scar on the scarred man's face wiggled, appearing extremely sinister. He looked eerily at Little Flame, and then slowly sat down under everyone's gazes. As both sides sat down, the hostile atmosphere in the huge auction market relaxed significantly. Several pairs of eyes were scanning Lin Dong's figure continuously. Apparently, they did not understand where did the Lin Dong trio's courage came from. Even when they are facing two notorious leaders of the Wind Cloud Empire, they did not display any fear at all. The other three great super empires were looking peculiarly at Lin Dong and his counterparts as well. There seemed to be an indescribable look in their eyes. As time passed, more and more terrifying influxes of people were converging at the auction market. From afar, it looked as if there was no end to the pitch-black sea of the attendees' heads. That kind of falter-bursting atmosphere made one's hair stood on his or her end. Previously, the man with scars on his face is called Meng Lai. There's another name for him in the Wanxiang city, the Butcher. Reportedly, ever since he stepped into the ancient battlefield, the blood on his hands amount to more than 100 lives. Furthermore, his killing methods are extremely brutal, Su Kuei informed Lin Dong in a soft voice. Butcher Meng Lai. Lin Dong nodded his head slightly. His name perfectly described his appearance. Meng Lai's fiendish aura was different from Little Flame's innate one. Clearly, the strong blood-reeking aura of Meng Lai was acquired and not innate. The other leader of the Wind Cloud Empire is called Feng Kang. If Meng Lai is a beast that only knows how to massacre people, then Feng Kang is a venomous snake that always hides in the dark and catches people by surprise. According to the information that I obtained, this fellow seems to have obtained an ancient sex inheritance and his powers are unpredictable. No doubt they are from a super empire. Lin Dong nodded his head again, and looked at the backs of the two figures whom everyone dreaded. He could not deny that Meng Lai and Feng Kang were indeed no pushovers. If not for Lin Dong's current powerful lineup, it would be very hard for him to go toe-to-toe with them. However, there was no if in this world. When Lin Dong just arrived in the ancient battlefield, he had no help at all. At that time, Little Flame had not left his beast form, while Little Martin was still a demon spirit. Both of them were not of great help to him, and he could only depend on himself to contend with his opponents. Naturally, he was being put in a few difficult situations as well. However, Lin Dong still managed to persist through that period of time. How could he not now? While Lin Dong was conversing softly at this side, at the most front row, Feng Kang's slender fingers were steepled and his eyes were looking straight ahead. He asked apathetically, "Is everything prepared?" "Don't worry, everything has been prepared. When that moment comes, Mu Lin and the rest will be in for a surprise," Meng Lai grinned and replied. Upon hearing these words, Feng Kang then nodded his head slightly and squinted his eyes like a poisonous snake that was going to spit out poison, extremely ruthless and vicious. "When this whole thing ends, I will not let those few lads off. By then, I will make them suffer till they beg for their own death." Meng Lai laughed malevolently. "Once I obtain the heavenly soul treasure, they are nothing but pushovers. I will let you handle them in any way as you wish." Feng Kang coldly replied. The malevolence on Meng Lai's face was getting more and more obvious. Just as he was about to say something, his mind suddenly jolted. He raised his head and looked at the huge stage in the center of the auction market. A figure slowly walked out onto the stage. As he walked nearer, the audience discovered that this figure is a middle-aged man, who was wearing a grey robe. His face was serene and did not waver just because there were countless covetous gazes focused on him. The moment this man appeared, Lin Dong's gaze immediately focused on him. Soon after, a solemn look flashed across Lin Dong's eyes. He could sense an extremely powerful yet well-hidden aura from the body of the man. He is the overseer whom the super sect stationed in the Wanxiang city. He is called Song Tai. However, no one has ever seen him take action before. Because of his backing from a super sect, whenever he opens his mouth to talk, not even those super empires dare to oppose him, Su Kuei informed Lin Dong. This man is not simple. If one does not have the capability, and dares to behave atrociously in front of him, he or she will just be humiliated. Little Martin suddenly gave a chuckle. It seemed that he could sense the hidden yet powerful energy waves coming off that middle-aged man. Lin Dong nodded his head slightly. It is foolish to think that the man in front of him would only rely on his super sex reputation to pressure people. The man, who suddenly appeared on the stage, immediately became the focal point of the entire auction market. Apparently, everyone in the auction market knew his identity. In an instant, there was a reverent look in everyone's gazes. Even those super empires that were seated in the front row started to restrain their arrogance. All of you are here because of the Wanxiang city's auction. I shall not dwell on the rules here. Fighting is prohibited in the auction market. No matter which empire are you from, a super empire or a low-ranked empire, once you violate this rule, you will be banished from here. The second time you violate the rule again, you will be disqualified from the entering the 100 Empire War. Everyone, am I clear? The middle-aged man put his hands behind his back and scanned the entire area with an unenthusiastic look. His firm voice echoed loudly in everyone's ears. As his gaze swept past Lin Dong, he paused for a while. Following which, when he saw little Martin, his facial expression froze slightly and a look of suspicion seemed to flash across his face. When he first saw little Martin, he could sense faint dangerous vibes emitting from the handsome young man. Am I mistaken? This kind of feeling died out after a short moment. When he refocused his attention, he could no longer sense it anymore. Following which, the middle-aged man muttered to himself and looked at little Martin once more, before shifting his gaze elsewhere. His perception is rather sharp. It appears that this man's mastery of mental energy has also reached an exceptionally high level, little Martin said after the middle-aged man shifted his gaze elsewhere. At this moment, Lin Dong silently heaved a sigh of relief as well. When he saw the middle-aged man staring at their direction, he was worried that little Martin's identity would be exposed. It seemed like he was worrying for nothing. There are not a lot of items up for auction this time around. However, these items have gone through a round of strict selection before being put up for the auction and therefore, they are still considered rare artifacts. I guess there will be a lot of people who are interested in them. On the auction stage, the middle-aged man looked at the auction market and laughed dully. Then, with a swipe of his robe, more than 10 resplendent light orbs shot out from his sleeves and hovered on the stage. Swoosh! At this moment, all the gazes were converged onto the stage. The audience could sense waves of powerful energy coming off those resplendent light orbs. From the look of it, these items are rather extraordinary. At the top of all these light orbs, there was a human head-sized, purple light orb. There were circles of halo surrounding that particular light orb. Indistinctly, it was giving off an energy wave that induced fear in countless people's hearts. Under that kind of energy wave, the entire auction market became silent. Following which, almost everyone's eyes, including Lin Dong's, began to burn with fervent. They clearly knew which was the only item that would possess such terrifying energy wave. Lin Dong licked his lips and stared tightly at the purple light orb with his eyes boiling. Is this the heavenly soul treasure that is to be auctioned this time around? The glowing purple orb surrounded by a faint halo looked extremely magical, as it hovered at the highest point of the stage. The unique and powerful energy wave that it emitted had undoubtedly made it the spotlight of the entire market, causing the eyes of countless onlookers to be filled with burning fervor and greed. If it were not for Song Tai standing guard on the auction stage with a straight face, and if he did not represent a super sect, the onlookers in this place would have their rationality overwhelmed by greed and try to seize the artifact by force. This kind of incident might be rarely seen in the outside world, yet it was commonplace in the ancient battlefield. In this place, if one was powerful enough, he or she could do anything without any obstruction. Atop the auction stage, Song Tai looked down at the restless auction market with a dull face. After a moment, he waved his hand and one of the glowing orbs flew down and landed on his palm. The light dissipated and materialized into an 3 feet tall green mountain peak. The first auction item is an earthly soul treasure, Soul Peak Sword. This sword is one of the finest treasures among the earthly soul treasures. Even the Nirvana golden body of a 3-yuan Nirvana stage practitioner cannot handle its sharpness. Song Tai flipped his palm and a green mountain peak long sword appeared in his hand. Surging with yuan power, the tip of the sword suddenly shot out a glimmering sword luster. Soon after, the sword luster began to hiss like a python that was on the move. Following which, a huge cyan rock on the auction stage exploded. The broken pieces were as smooth as a mirror, and this sharpness attracted the attention of numerous people. Soul Peak Sword, starting bid 300,000 Nirvana pills, Song Tai flatly announced after putting away the sword. Clearly, Song Tai was not a professional auctioneer. This flat tone usually failed to amp up the atmosphere. However, this auction item was rather good and hence, the atmosphere of the auction market did not die down due to Song Tai's tone. 312,000. The sharpness of this Soul Peak sword indeed surpassed most earthly soul treasures. The Nirvana stage and Nirvana golden body were what symbolized a Nirvana stage practitioner. If one possessed such an excellent soul treasure, he or she would undoubtedly gain the upper hand during a confrontation. Thus, right after Song Tai finished his sentence, someone immediately bidded 315,000. Lin Dong watched the continuously rising clamor in the auction market while his face remained placid. His gaze swept across the hovering glowing orbs above Song Tai's head. Obviously, some kind of seal had been deployed on these glowing orbs. As such, he could not see through these glowing orbs and identify the artifacts within them. However, with the sharp senses of his mental energy, Lin Dong could roughly sense the differences among a few glowing orbs. The energy wave emitted by each glowing orb was different from the others. It appeared that this auction did have some bearings. Brother Lin Dong, if you want to fight for that heavenly soul treasure, and you do not have at least 5 million Nirvana pills, I'm afraid you won't even have the chance to open your mouth and bid, Sukue casually said to Lin Dong after seeing the audience bidding for the Soul Peak Sword. 5 million Nirvana pills, so much. Suru was slightly startled by this huge number. It seemed she had never seen such a huge amount of Nirvana pills. That is only the minimum bid. Heavenly soul treasures are supposed to be invaluable. Since one has finally appeared now, those formidable super empires will not give up so easily. Sukue laughed bitterly. Lin Dong laughed. Currently, he indeed did not have much Nirvana pills. When he was inside the ancient treasure trove, his main focus was not on obtaining Nirvana pills. Nonetheless, even though he did not have a robust foundation of Nirvana pills, he still had other things in his hands. For example, he managed to obtain some mysterious elixir pills in the last pill room of the ancient treasure trove. Those pills were extremely valuable. Just one of those pills was enough to buy a huge amount of Nirvana pills. Therefore, Lin Dong's financial resources would not lose out to those super empires. By hook or by crook, he must obtain that heavenly soul treasure. While Lin Dong and Sukue were conversing, the first bidding round of the auction ended. That Soul Peak sword had been bought by an empire for a winning bid price of 500,000 Nirvana pills. In the following bidding rounds, several relatively strong earthly soul treasures were put up for auction. Some were offensive types while others were defensive types. Overall, these items were considered powerful. One of the items, which was called Magma Stone, had been sold for a winning bid price of 800,000 Nirvana pills. This amount certainly caused a lot of people to smack their lips. As the rarity of the items being put up for the auction increased, the atmosphere in the auction market livened up increasingly as well. However, in the first few front rows, the 4 great super empires, and some relatively powerful high-ranked empires had yet to take any actions. Clearly, they did not want to waste too much of their financial resources on these insignificant artifacts. Just like them, Lin Dong was not moved by these earthly soul treasures. His slender fingers were steepled and his eyes were slightly drooping, while he silently waited for the artifact of his dreams to appear. The next item that is up for auction will be an unique elixir, the balanced spirit fruit. Not a lot of people know about the existence of this elixir. However, there's no need to doubt its beneficial effect. The mastery of Yuan power is not a smooth level road. Sometimes, for certain reasons, the Yuan power in one's body may wreak havoc and injure his or her body. This balanced spirit fruit is able to bring balance to the chaotic Yuan power. On the auction stage, a palm-sized jade green fruit suddenly appeared on Song Tai's hand. It seemed to exude a faint unique aura. Balanced spirit fruit. Even Lin Dong was startled when he heard this name. Clearly, he was unfamiliar with this item. It seems that my intuition is right, this item does exist. Let's bid for it. If we obtain it, I can help Suru to control the tremendous power in her body, little Martin suddenly said, while he trembled with excitement and enthusiasm at this moment. Oh? Lin Dong was surprised. Apparently, little Martin had been waiting for this item to appear. This kind of elixir might not help Nirvana stage practitioners to a significant extent, as most people at this level only have one power in their body, which is the Yuan power. Therefore, this kind of elixir is only useful for Samsara stage practitioners. That's because most Samsara stage practitioners cannot not control the balance of life chi and death chi in their bodies, which eventually lead to the collapse of their physical bodies, little Martin chuckled. If this item appears outside, those Samsara stage practitioners will fight over it to their deaths. However, in this place, there are not a lot of people who recognize the usefulness of this elixir. Various types of powers, Lin Dong was astonished. His scenario was somewhat similar to this. You don't need it. The ancient universe formation in your body is way better than any elixirs. You are one lucky guy. In the future, you will experience the benefits of the ancient universe formation yourself. When the ancient universe formation in Lin Dong's body was mentioned, even little Martin could not help but smack his lips and explained. Balanced spirit fruit, starting bidding price, 1 million Nirvana pills. At this moment, on the auction stage, Song Tai started to yell out a starting bidding price that sent the audience into an uproar. A lot of people felt incredulous about the fact that an elixir would fetch such an expensive price. With regards to the uproar among the audience, Song Tai did not say anything. Naturally, he knew how precious the balanced spirit fruit was and the fact that it would not receive much recognition in this place. That was because this item was not useful to the type of practitioners here. After the uproar in the auction market quietened down, the audience started to whisper among themselves, but no one was willing to bid for the item. 1 million Nirvana pills was not a small amount. No one wanted to purchase the so-called balanced spirit fruit for such an amount of Nirvana pills. Lin Dong silently looked at this scene. After a few minutes, he finally said plainly, 1,100,000 Nirvana pills. Whoa! Lin Dong's bid immediately caught everyone's attention. Countless people were looking at him stunningly. Their gazes were somewhat eccentric. Clearly, they treated him as a foolish spendthrift. Brother Lin Dong. Upon hearing Lin Dong's bid, Suru's quiet and exquisite face changed slightly. She knew that Lin Dong bidded for the balanced spirit fruit for her sake. However, the bidding price of 1 million Nirvana pills made her distressed and touched at the same time. On the auction stage, Song Tai was shocked by the unexpected bid as well. His gaze shifted towards Lin Dong while containing a tinge of astonishment. After Lin Dong bidded, no one wanted to increase the bid. Apparently, they did not want to be crazy like Lin Dong. After seeing this scene, Lin Dong grinned. However, just as he was about to speak again, a cold voice came gently from the front row, 1,200,000 Nirvana pills. The voice belonged to Feng Kang of the Wind Cloud Empire. After yelling out his bid, he turned his head around and scanned Lin Dong with an indifferent look. The corners of his mouth were slightly curled, as if he was sneering at Lin Dong. Lin Dong squinted his eyes slightly and stared at the troublemaking Feng Kang. He withdrew the glint of fury in his eyes and counterbid, 1,500,000. 1,700,000. Feng Kang retorted lazily. Even though he already planned to get Lin Dong and his counterparts, after obtaining the heavenly soul treasure, he felt that it was rather amusing to tease his opponents. 2 million. Lin Dong opened his mouth and bidded again. Brother Lin Dong, Suru's huge eyes could not help but become teary. She casted a look of hatred at the troublemaking Feng Kang. If Su Kuei was not holding her back, she would have asked Lin Dong to give up on this meaningless contest. Don't worry, it's definitely worthwhile to pay 2 million Nirvana pills for the balanced spirit fruit, little Martin reassured plainly. It was obvious that his handsome face was rather pissed off. Feng Kang's action was indeed despicable. He, you are truly worthy of being the inheritor of the 4 great mysterious sex inheritance. You are rather well off. Since you want it so much, you can have it then. Waving his hands, Feng Kang smirked coldly and looked at Lin Dong mockingly, after raising the bidding price to 2 million Nirvana pills. Lin Dong looked at Feng Kang and smiled after a while. A Qiankuan bag then flew out of his sleeves and landed on Song Tai's hand. After taking a look at it, the latter nodded his head slightly. With a snap of his finger, the balanced spirit fruit flew towards Lin Dong, who kept it after receiving it. That fellow is simply too despicable. After seeing Lin Dong kept the balanced spirit fruit and sat back onto his chair, Suru was still seething with anger. She was not happy with the fact that Lin Dong had to pay an extra 1 million Nirvana pills due to Feng Kang's meddling. Don't worry. I will make him pay back both the capital and interest next time around. Lin Dong gently smiled. Within that smile was a slight bit of chilliness. It was obvious that Lin Dong was infuriated with Feng Kang's meddling. This video will end here.